the different accents. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, everyone. So just starting to kind of break the ice. The different accents in Arabic that, for example, when you have the Egyptians, they would replace the ja, or at least some Egyptians would replace the ja into a ga. Or, for example, some would replace the qa into a gha, like the Sudanese, or replace, for example, the qa into a hamza, or replace the sin into a ta. Now that's a strange one. The sin into a ta. So, or the kaf into a cha. That's very common. Like the
Oh yes,
Iraqi,
slowness.
which exactly. Well, exactly. Or they would say, for example, and by the way, when you replace the kaf into a sheen, or even the ta into the sin into a ta, and all of these, they were accents that were mainly spoken by certain Arabi tribes. But the reason why you would have what we know of that Arabi, that no, it's the kaf that is pronounced as a kaf and not a cha, even though you had tribes, they were called Bani Tamim, that actually spoke in that accent, and you had tribes that spoke in flipping the sin into a ta, or the qa into a ghain, or the jim into a gim. All of that, they were actually spoken by Arabic tribes. But the main reason why we don't have that documented is really because the only accent, Arabic accent that we know of that is documented as not influenced by other accents or by other, at least foreign languages, is really the Quran, which is the Qurashi accent. So the Qurashi accent, which basically is the accent for the Quran, that's because we have it documented. But of course, we cannot read the Quran based on other accents except the accents that were in the other qira'at. So you had other qira'at that were really other accents. Now, those accents or qira'at were approved by the Prophet ﷺ himself. He read it for these people, or read it at least, and it was transmitted that this is an approved accent to read the Quran in, which is what is called the qira'at, in the different qira'at, sab'at ahruf, etc. So you will have certain people reading based on one qira'ah. So you would have, for example, qira'at warsh, where the ra al-maftuha, the ra that has a fatha, is read as muraqqaqa, as a soft ra. But for Hafs and Asim, it is actually read as a thick ra. So for example, if you were right here, instead of يشرون الحياة الدنيا بالآخرة, ra, that ra that is a thick ra for the Hafs and Asim. But if you were to read it, based on رواية Warsh, it would be بالآخرة. Look at that ra, it became different than ra. All right, so we're going to start right now. We yesterday talked about a number of different things, and number one, we talked about the piece about jihad and the different stages of how jihad was prescribed, and we did the comparison between today's let's call it battle slash political of course powers, and how they would apply it today, and even the means for Muslims in order, one, whether it's to expand or whether it is to maintain security and maintain justice as well. So the main reason for jihad is really, one, to bring about security, justice for the Muslims, number one, and even at an international level as well. So Muslims don't contradict themselves. So they would basically adopt that this is what we believe is considered as justice. This is what we believe is what brings in, of course, safety, security, etc., then therefore we have to make it at a global level and not necessarily stay at our own little corner, even if it's a small place. So yes, going global, basically. And we talked about those stages, and where first it was in defense of those that were vulnerable, then it was in defense of the city of Medina, then it went into engaging in something similar to proxy wars in order to make sure that those anticipated or expected threats do not come closer. So basically anticipating the threat and even going for what is called the saraya, which basically are the different battles that the Prophet ﷺ did not join or be part of, but he was the one that gave the order. And then, of course, the final stage was the jihad, which basically is at a global scale in order to, of course, implement the same thing. And where حتى يكون الدين, that all the deen is basically for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And we mentioned a couple things in regards to that. So we said in terms of وَإِن مِّنكُمْ, we talked about why وَإِن مِّنكُمْ. We went into وَلَئِنْ أَصَابَكُمْ فَضْلٌ مِّنَ اللَّهِ لَا يَقُولَنَّ كَأَن لَّمْ تَكُن بَيْنَكُمْ وَبَيْنَهُ مَوَدَّةٌ. We talked about within the Muslim society, how we would have different groups. We would have even, of course, those that are bringing in the regression within the ummah, and how others would actually be bringing in the advancement, or at least bringing in the power within the ummah. And we also talked about فَلْيُقَاتِلْ فِي سَبِيلِ اللَّهِ, and we said about al-qital, about fighting for the cause of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. We talked about that the al-qital actually has different meanings. And of course, when we talked about al-qital, we said basically sometimes it can be to go into a struggle or an effort, or at least it doesn't always have to be combat. And the combat piece, at least in this area, would really be referring to the combat piece. We also talked about women, that they were not required or even are not really permitted to join in combat. And what they would be joining in is probably wound, or at least helping the wounds. In other words, nursing, doctors, etc. But only in times when they are being attacked. So in that situation, when they have no choice, that's when they can join in combat. So basically, women do not join in combat. And of course, is that really somehow because Islam feels that somehow women are inferior? Has nothing to do with being inferior. It has something to do with regarding that when we're speaking about combat, it requires physical power, and certainly to put women in an obligation to join the army or even in combat is basically, one, exposing them to more hardship and exposing them to probably challenges that Islam was there to protect. So they could actually be exposed to probably rape, to probably different unpleasant things within the army, harming their body, etc. And of course, why put women in such pain? So women, they can do other things. And we talked about the hadith. We talked about it in detail yesterday in regards to the hadith. What would be an alternative? Basically being whether it's a good mother, a good wife, or a good citizen trying to bring about the best within the society. And we talked about different ways to even advance the ummah, and that it doesn't have to be through war and battle and all of that. But certainly we said that such a peace is definitely crucial for every single nation. Every single nation would basically have an army protecting its borders, protecting its citizens, protecting its rights, protecting its sovereignty. And we basically said that Islam and Muslims basically are required to do the same thing. So basically, this is something that is God-given. So we have to also work towards that. Of course, right now and during our times, just when you speak about that, you're going to have people like Daniel Pipes, Spencer, Robert Spencer, and all those jihad watch people are going to be, look, they're teaching that. It's basically, they'll go into all of that details. But anyhow, one thing I actually wanted to take us a little bit back. I know we wanted to move forward, but we're going to take something just a little bit back in just a bit, but not until we finish at least the part about الجهاد that we were talking about. وما لكم لا تقاتلون في سبيل الله والمستضعفين من الرجال والنساء. And why would you not? And of course, this is not a question. So this is not here as really seeking an answer from you. This is basically for tahfiz. This is basically to provoke you to think about the argument behind all of this. So when you look at وَمَا لَكُمْ لَا تُقَاتِلُونَ فِي سَبِيلِ اللَّهِ, and why don't you, even though not really an accurate translation, but this is more of a clause where it is not istifham, but this is basically to provoke you to do something. In where fi sabilillah, why would you not fight for the sake of this Lord Almighty? Wal mustadafin. This wa right here, this is not a wa to mean that just let's call it an absolute and, but this is basically to explain, why am I fighting for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? Why am I even going in combat from the beginning? So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, it basically explains here, al-mustad'afin. Al-mustad'afin, the root is da'ufa, and da'ufa actually means to be weak. Al-mustad'afin, this is right there as a description. So this is describing those that were weak, describing those that were vulnerable. And of course, if men are vulnerable and women are vulnerable and children become vulnerable, what does it mean to become vulnerable? It basically means that their deen is persecuted. Two, let's point it out right there. Maybe we could write it down. So what is actually to be considered as mustadaf? It's basically going back to the DNAIM rule. Their deen is basically persecuted. Two, their life is basically in danger. Their mental health is in danger. Their ird, their chastity and family is in danger, and certainly their wealth and property probably confiscated. So that's what makes somebody mustadaf. When, of course, you have another superpower probably abusing their weakness, and that's why they basically abused in where they had trespassed the security for those people's deen, those people's nafs. So let me write it down for those that are new to this one. The DNAIM rule is basically that rule that is extremely important. So deen and nafs and aql and ird and mal. And what we mean by that, deen would basically be the religion and basically the piety. Okay, so here we go, piety and religion. Nafs would mean life. Aql would mean mental health. Ird would mean chastity / family. All right, and mal would mean property and wealth. So wealth and property. Okay. And of course, these are the main 5 legal maxims in Islam that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had regarded as sacred, and regarded that every single person has the right that these areas are protected. So Islam has its own definition of what it considers as human rights and what it considers as a priority. الذين يقولون ربنا أخرجنا من هذه القرية الظالم أهلها. So what would they basically, this is not only to literally say يقولون ربنا أخرجنا, but this could be 2 things. There's a speech that a person literally says, and there is lisanul hal and lisanul maqal. Let me just explain this one when we're speaking, because this is very common in the Quran, in where you can have something that is called lisanul hal and lisanul maqal. Let me explain this one. So lisanul hal and lisanul maqal. Lisanul maqal, basically literally what somebody speaks, somebody what they utter. So this is lisanul maqal. Lisan actually means tongue, but this is a metaphor to mean the speech. So there could be a speech that one might literally say, and that is, so let's say, let's call it the spoken words, and there are the lisanul hal, basically the descriptive, the words not literally said, but the description. So this is a description of what the person is, basically the situation speaking for itself. Okay, so the situation speaking for itself, that's what we would consider it as lisanul hal. So here, when you look at this word, الذين يقولون ربنا أخرجنا من هذه القرية الظالم أهلها, it could actually be two things. يقولون, where they literally said, Ya Allah, that of course, ربنا actually means our Lord. And of course, when you say Rabbana, it's different than saying Ilahana, because Rabb here is more to invoke the Lord Almighty as being the one to cherish, as being the one that is the Lord, as the one that has the basically the power to give you all the provisions. All right, but when you were to say, for example, ilahana, even though at the end of the day you could actually use both, but ilah would more relate to sovereignty, would more relate to authority, but you can still use both ways to make that dua. So rabbana akhrijna would basically, they're making the dua right there. Ya Allah, get us out. Get us out. In other words, save us from this city that its own people are oppressors. And certainly the city here, al-Qarya, this is considered, is it al-Ahdiyya or al-Istighraqiyya? This, and remember, al-Ahdiyya would be the particularized al, and the definite article, al, and al-Istighraqiyya would mean every single city that is basically an abusive city, they're making that dua. So in this context, it was actually a particular city, and that was actually Mecca. So when they were saying أخرجنا من هذه القرية الظالم أهلها, this was talking about the people of Mecca who had actually persecuted the Muslims, who persecuted the Muslims in Mecca when they had become Muslim. All right, so I'm just going to go and let you actually see that right there in Tafsir al-Qurtubi. All right, let's see right there, and where, let's see, I'm going to take you that. Okay, here we go. So huna, he said, that is al-Qurtubi quote, he said, Makkatu bi-ijma'i min al-muta'awwilin. So basically all the different scholars had said that it was actually Mecca. Okay, so when it says al-zalimi ahluha, does that mean that this is a perpetual description? The answer is no. This is not a perpetual description. This is a description that would be within a particular context. So in other words, this is not talking about the city per se, but this is actually talking about the dwellers, and certainly those that had behaved in a particular way in where they had abused the people that had become Muslim. Of course, later the Muhajirin abused them, and of course they would say, وَجْعَلْ لَنَا مِن لَدُنْكَ. The word ladunka means that you're basically saying from you, coming from your own power. That is, وَجْعَلْ لَنَا وَجْعَلْ لَنَا, meaning, when you look at ij'al means when you don't actually have all the data that shows that something is about to happen, but you're actually invoking Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and you are basically saying, although I don't see any signs of such a change actually happening. But Ya Allah, you have the power to flip and basically bring about all the different data basically and all the necessary things to really make from nothing, from no power whatsoever, to actually bringing in the power and flipping basically the whole circumstances and flipping the whole situation completely different than what we actually can anticipate and what we actually see before our eyes. So here, وَجَعَلْ لَنَا مِن لَدُنْكَ وَلِيًّا. What is al-wali? Al-wali, al-wali could be a deputy. Al-wali can be basically a person in authority, and can be a leader, and can be a person that is pious. So generally just a pious person. So when you look at وَاجْعَلْ لَنَا مِن لَدُنْكَ وَلِيًّا, and of course we would have al-wilaya al-amma and we would have al-wilaya al-khassa. Let me write that down for a little bit, although not necessarily completely and directly related here, but I think it's important to mention this piece of it. So when we look at the word wali, I'm going to write it down in blue. It was supposed to be right there. Maybe I can write it down in a different color so it could be more visual. Okay, here we go. So il-wali. Now, when you look at il-wali, like I said, it can mean authority, it can mean power, it can mean leader, all of that. But of course, il-wali, there is what is called il-wilaya al-amma, and there is il-wilaya al-khassa. And of course, when you're looking at wilaya amma, that would be a person that is in charge, in where they're actually taking somewhat of like a government position. In wilaya al-khassa, yes, it's a power, but this is more of like a CEO in a company or etc. So this is wilaya al-khassa. This is just an example. And of course, wali, that basically is the person in charge. It could be a guardian as well. So a guardian could also be a wali, in where there could be a guardian for somebody with a disability, a guardian for maybe a specific guardian to do one specific thing. Okay, so this is probably a guardian in where he's only a guardian to basically support, because this person probably needs custody or etc. They're basically going to be assigned to do a specific guardianship, to do a specific job only. And there can be a general guardianship in where, for example, the wali would be for the children. So that's a general guardianship, in where they would be making the decisions in regards to maybe what city they would move to, their money, what happens to all the different things in regards to their life. This is basically a complete and a full authorization that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had given the parents to basically make the decisions on behalf of the children in regards to everything in their life. All right, so this is that particular wilaya is basically by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. You can have certain wilaya taken from, whether it's the husband or even the father, etc., when somebody does what is called التعسف في استعمال الحق. What is التعسف? التعسف في استعمال الحق, basically when you have somebody abusing their power. So that's a different abusing their power, abusing the authority, abusing the guardianship. But here, وَجْعَلْ لَنَا مِن لَدُنْكَ وَلِيًّا. So they're basically making the dua, Ya Allah, let there be a leader. Why is that important? Because of course, we recognize that it's usually in Allah لا يزع بالسلطان ما لا يزع بالقرآن. The power of having a leader, the power of having a person in charge and authority is basically the start of any change. The start of any change, the start of any political change, any financial change basically comes when there is a leader to be in charge, to bring about a plan in order to help, whether we're speaking about the vulnerable or basically to help in changing the circumstances. So this is extremely important to keep in mind, because il-wali and il-wali is basically going to be the start of the start of a change and the start of having a unity towards a change. And of course, the Prophet ﷺ had mentioned in the hadith that even if two were to travel, there has to be one that is a leader. So this is also part of al-wali. وَاجْعَلْ لَنَا مِن لَدُنْكَ نَصِيرًا. Again, they said, وَاجْعَلْ لَنَا, Ya Allah, and because the circumstances were definitely not showing of any change that is happening soon at any time. So they would basically make the dua, وَاجْعَلْ لَنَا مِن لَدُنْكَ, you bring about the change, you bring about the circumstances from you yourself, نَصِيرًا يرحمكم الله. So نَصِيرًا would be to bring about a victory. So it's enough for me to say Yarhamkumullah once. I don't have to say it each and every single time. But you can respond. All right. Nasira, meaning to bring about. Okay, now he's taking it as a job. Nasira, Ya Allah, give us victory from your end. And of course, for a believer, we would basically regard whether it's provisions, whether it's food, whether it's nasr, victory, all of that comes from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is capable of changing all the circumstances, even if the data does not show of the possibility of victory or the possibility of financing or etc., or even economy changing or the circumstances changing. You would have the faith in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that He is capable of creating al-asbab, creating the reasons, creating the tools to change about the circumstances and even change the direction of how the outcomes would basically take place. And of course, when they said, when they were making this dua, it wasn't necessarily lisanul maqal, which is basically literally what they had said as a quote, as words that they had mentioned, but it was lisanul hal, in where it was describing the situation, was describing basically the circumstances that would match and fit what would basically describe their situation. All right, so we don't necessarily have to say the same exact word, رَبَّنَا أَخْرِجْنَا مِنْ هَذِهِ الْقَرْيَةِ الظَّالِمِ أَهْلُهَا. You don't necessarily have to say that. Sometimes your own situation actually speaks for itself. Your own situation speaks for itself, and certainly the people that are persecuted. So here's a question. If a person is going through oppression or some form of abuse, they're going to be rewarded. So why even make the dua that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will change the circumstances? Why can't we just ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, Ya Allah, let us be patient in such circumstances, and that's it? Because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had actually required of you to seek the different means to uplift the oppression. So staying in oppression or staying in abuse is not something that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had asked you to stay in Islam. Yes, that was the situation in the early times of Islam, in where you were not asked to fight or even retaliate in any way, and you were really only left with being patient and enduring the pain. And that's exactly what happened even when we're speaking about Khabbab ibn al-Arat, who was a blacksmith, and he was basically ordered by his own master. In fact, she would take the heated rods, take the heated tin, and of course all the heated material, and actually put it on his skin. And Khabbab bin al-Arat, being a slave, didn't have the power to do anything about it because it was heated metal, and he was a blacksmith, and his master was the one, every single time she would take this heated metal and actually put it on him, and he would go to the Prophet ﷺ and say, that he was not capable of handling, of course, and enduring the pain. That's when he went to the Prophet ﷺ, and the Prophet ﷺ would make the dua that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala would give victory for Khabbab ibn al-Arat. And we know the story. Later, Khabbab ibn al-Arat, his master, his female master, she basically started getting severe headaches. And of course, she was given a prescription by, I guess, the society at the time that in order to heal and treat the headaches that she was going through, that she had to use heated metal and actually put it on her head. And certainly the one that was going to do that was really Khabbab ibn al-Arat. Exactly, look at that. And Khabbab ibn al-Arat was the one that was actually doing the job as basically from and upon the request of his own master. And of course, I guess gangrene is going to be coming in. So she basically got infected with all those wounds and all those basically home remedy and dies as a result. So here's Khabbab bin Arat actually saved from that. You know, you would never think that the circumstances would come in your benefit or even come in your way, but then Rabbil Alameen changes all the circumstances. And here we go, you could see it. وَاجْعَلْ لَنَا. The circumstances did not show whatsoever that that was at all coming that way. الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا يُقَاتِلُونَ فِي سَبِيلِ اللَّهِ. Those that believe would, what the word يُقَاتِلُون is, the word يُقَاتِلُون right there is actually in the present tense. There are three main verbs. Let's write it down right there. So in Lugha Arabiya, you either have what is called a past tense verb, which is al-madi, and you either have al-mudari, which basically is a present tense, or you could have the imperative verb al-amr. So in order to look at the present tense, you could see, why is that important? Why am I even going into all these grammatical classifications? Well, that's in order to help us recognize that this is not speaking about the past, but this is going to be something that the Muslims will be doing and must do, as it is a religious description right there in where it is a present tense. So it doesn't stop. يقاتلون في سبيل الله. They have to continue. And this is basically a description that the Muslims themselves would actually be practicing, and it never becomes history. Let's say it that way. في سبيل الله, for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And of course, when we're speaking about fighting for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, we're talking about ikhlas. And of course, it's important to speak. I want to bring you out this hadith. أول من تسعر بهم النار. I want you to look at this hadith. This hadith is actually important. Oh, well, it's not like there's a hadith that's not important, but yeah, I want you to see this hadith. Here we go, we got this hadith right out here. I want you to look at it. Okay, let's see. This hadith is basically narrated by Muslim. Let's look at it. So here we go. Abu Hurairah said, I heard the Prophet ﷺ say, إِنَّ أَوَّلَ النَّاسِ يُقْضَى يَوْمَ الْقِيَامَةِ عَلَيْهِ رَجُلٌ اسْتَشْهَدَ فَأُتِيَ بِهِ فعرفه نعمه فعرفها. قال فما علمت فيها أو فما عملت قال فما عملت فيها؟ قال قاتلت فيك حتى استشهد. قال كذبت ولكنك قاتلت لأن يقال هو جريء. وقد قيل ثم أمر به فسحب على وجهه حتى ألقي في النار. ورجل تعلم العلم وعلمه وقرأ القرآن فأتي به فعرفه نعمه فعرفها. قال فما عملت فيها؟ قال تعلمت العلم وعلمته وقرأت فيك القرآن. قال كذبت ولكنك تعلمت ليقال عالم وقرأت القرآن ليقال هو قارئ. فقد قيل ثم أمر به فسحب على وجهه حتى ألقي في النار. ورجل وسع الله عليه وأعطاه من أصناف المال فأتي به فعرفه نعمه فعرفها. قال فما عملت فيها؟ قال ما تركت من سبيل تحب أن ينفق فيها إلا أنفقت فيها لك. قال كذبت ولكنك فعلت ليقال هو جواد. فقد قيل ثم أمر به فسحب على وجهه ثم ألقي في النار. I want you to look at this hadith because this hadith is probably a main hadith in this regard. So let's see. The Prophet ﷺ actually says the first people who Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will judge on Judgment Day is basically a man who had istashhad, who basically died as a martyr, and then he would be brought, of course, the malaika would bring him, فَعَرَّفَهُ نِعَمَهُ. In other words, he would basically tell him all these different things that I had basically given you, all the provisions that I had given you, and he recognized, yep, I recognize all these different potentials, all these different gratitudes, all these different efforts, all these different things that you had given to me. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala would say, what did you do with it? And this is important because each and every single one of us has a potential. What did you do with that potential? I might have a potential, you might have a potential that's completely different. Someone else might have a potential that's completely different. So in other words, the potentials, you're going to be asked about them. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gives you a potential that's completely different than someone else. Someone else, their potential in basically talab al-ilm. Other people, their potential is in hifz. Other people, their potential is in science. Other people, their potential is in making money. Their brains work that way. So let's see. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells him, what did you do with it? And he said, well, I used it to fight for your sake, that is. And I basically died fighting for your sake, that is. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, you lied, but you had actually fought in order to be known and people would say about you that you are basically a brave person. So let's see what happened. And it was said, and people had recognized him, that he was a brave person, he was mighty, all of that. Then, of course, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gives the orders to the malaika, and then he would be basically dragged on his face until until he would be thrown in hellfire. Another man, تعلم العلم, basically had seeked knowledge and he taught it. In other words, and people knew him that he was a scholar, he was a person, قرأ al-Quran, he was a person that was teaching Quran, person that was teaching Islam, person that was teaching all that. نسأل الله العفو والعافية يا ربي. فأتي به, he was brought and he was basically right there. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells him, well, you recognize all the bounties that I had given you. What did you do with it? And he said, well, I learned the knowledge and I taught it. And I even read the Quran. And of course, in other words, even read the Quran for you. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, you lied, but you had actually read it and you learned the knowledge in order to be called a scholar. And you had read the Quran and people had, in order for people to call you as a reciter. And sure thing. And then later he was basically pulled or dragged onto his face until thrown in hellfire. Another man that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had given him lots of rizq and lots of money and lots of provisions and gave him different kinds of wealth. And then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells him that you recognize basically this wealth that I had given you, all of that. He recognizes it. And he said, what did you do with it? And he said, I did not leave any place to spend for your sake, but I had spent for your sake. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala would say, you lied, but you had actually done so in order to be called generous. And so it was called, and so it was said. And he would be dragged in hellfire and on his face and be thrown in hellfire. Now, we want to look at this in when we're speaking about whether the person, the combatant or the scholar, or even the person that's donating, all of those basically, all of that is in order to bring about one main theme, and which is the theme in where don't do something for the sake of getting praised for it, or even getting somehow people's description, or even people recognizing you for it, because at the end Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَمَا أُمِرُوا إِلَّا لِيَعْبُدُوا اللَّهَ مُخْلِصِينَ لَهُ الدِّينَ. They were ordered to only do one thing, to worship Allah subhanahu subhanahu wa ta'ala, being sincere in their obedience to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, sincere in their obedience to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and therefore taking that in consideration, that's what would mean to basically fight for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. All right, let's get fi sabilillah. So wanted to just mention that one. And of course, it's really important. So what if somebody says, well, I do actually have different intentions and I am trying to correct my intention. We would say, don't stop. Even if on the inside, you would feel that your intention is probably seeking praise or probably being happy that people are recognizing you for probably the donations that you're giving, the ilm that you're giving, etc. Don't stop. Continue with what you're doing and work on your ikhlas. How do I work on my ikhlas? What should I do? Number one, it starts with you recognizing the magnificence of the Lord Almighty. You work two ways. You recognize.
Can I ask you a question?
Yep,
Sorry.
go ahead.
I figured that was a good time to ask. I'm sorry. So, okay, let's say you have something like you really like. I'm not talking about money. Something, and you're and you want to like give that, right? For the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala or something. But yet you still you're like, oh, you still miss it. Is that bad?
So work on your ikhlas. Work on your ikhlas.
No, I mean, like, let's say you gave it, but yet you're still like, oh man, I know. You know, I'm just wondering if that's the same thing.
Right. So keep,
Yeah.
even for the past donations or whatever, let's call it whatever contribution you had done, whether we're speaking about an effort put in or whether we're speaking about money, always make the dua that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala would, even the things that you had basically not were fully, and let's call it 100% sincerity, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala would basically regard it as a good reward for you. So you would always make the dua that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala basically as in the dua where Ya Allah, even for the things that we had made mistakes in, make it as something that you would dismiss the mistake and accept it as a good deed. So always make the dua. All right.
Okay.
So even the past, yep.
Yeah.
Even the past, even the things that you might have committed in a wrong way, you always want to make the dua that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will change your sayyi'at into hasanat. All right. So anyhow, let's look at, of course, when we're speaking about ikhlas, this is extremely important. It's a main thing. So the question is, okay, well, how can I get my ikhlas in place when I'm trying to work hard? What do I do in that situation? It's basically number one is that recognize the magnificence of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Because usually when people are seeking riyah, or when people are seeking praise from the people, it's really because they had exaggerated the importance of people's recognition. So once you recognize how it's all like you're zooming in and out. So zooming out people is by basically starting from zooming on Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So basically zoom out and zoom in, seeing the magnificence of the Lord Almighty. But sometimes I fail. So what should I do? Well, zoom in, I guess, a moment of kafa bil mauti wa'adha. Ask yourself, when I'm here lying down dead, il-maut itself, just death, is one main best maw'adha. Ask yourself, when I'm right there dead, what are the people's benefited? What is their praise going to do to me? Nothing. Two, zoom in akhirah. Take a moment to zoom in akhirah. When you're standing right there and in front of everyone, Yawm al-Qiyamah, and your sins are exposed and your intentions are exposed, that's the real scary thing. So the more you think and you know about Yawm al-Qiyamah, the more you take those stations in Yawm al-Qiyamah seriously and scary. So by learning more, you're expanding your not only recognition, but you're expanding and you're grounding your sentiments to really recognize, and as if you're living that day. It's not an issue of, yes, I know there's Yawm al-Qiyamah. The more details you know, the more you're capable of visualizing, not only in your mind, but also visualizing it to the point that you could actually feel it. This is a serious matter. The more you're capable of visualizing Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to mean not as basically Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala as, because we don't know what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala looks like, but we basically recognize Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's magnificence. And how do we recognize Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's magnificence? Learning the names and attributes of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The names and attributes of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, they are to reflect, one, how much Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's authority encompasses, the magnificence of the Lord Almighty as a deity, and certainly all the different names and attributes are really to help you recognize the magnificence of the Lord Almighty for you to relate to it. So I'm still struggling, even when I want to do that. What should I do? It's important. Reduce, again, zoom out on the different things that you're getting yourself busy with. Write down on a piece of paper, what am I busy with? How much time am I spending in basically the daily chores or the daily things that I'm basically getting myself busy with? How much time am I spending on this and that? Once you start giving up on those things, canceling out on what's keeping you busy, then you'll start having more time to, one, learn about Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Take the time to, one, do talab al-ilm. Number two, in order to recognize the magnificence of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, you want to look at what is of a concern to you. If it's your health, your beauty, your appearance, maybe go and visit hospitals and see and recognize that all these people were actually living the same exact life that you were living. They were enjoying workout, they were enjoying beauty, she was enjoying basically attraction, all of that. And it wasn't until, boom, one day, everything just changed. Diagnosed with cancer, everything was changed. Look at the before and after pictures for you to recognize that this could also happen to you. If you're basically so happy about the money and that's what's making you busy all the time, money and money and money, go and visit the poor. Visit the poor, take a time. This is all to work on the therapy. And I think it's really worth mentioning here. They're in the Sufi world, they have something where the sheikh, and there's the murid, and where the sheikh would basically mentor the murid, the student, in order to teach them how to grow in their Quran or in their Islam, in their spirituality. And this is part of it. So I'm not here mentoring you directly, but here I'm basically laying out how we can train ourselves. So if you're finding yourself that you're spending so much time on probably shopping online or shopping in person, or probably talking about the best deals, well, maybe you can look at and visit the poor. Literally make your visitation to the poor, rather than basically visiting those that have the money. Those are just always boasting about the name brands that they're buying and all of that. No, work your heart in a different direction. If you're basically fond, you're just into basically that education, in education, basically learning, let's say, things about secular education, let's say it that way. Well, what you can probably also seek different places that they're spending time to seek ilm. So this is not a bad thing to learn physics, learn chemistry, all of that. That's not a bad thing at all. But learning your deen, there are certain things that you have to learn about your deen. Investing time to learn about your deen. And of course, there's so many different pacifiers. If you're spending so much time in entertainment, probably watching movies, etc., maybe you want to take something else, and instead of hearing and watching these movies, maybe taking the time to spend in visiting people, sitting with people that are going through hardships and learning how their life actually changed and going through hardship. So then you're recognizing the bounties that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had given you in where you're not dealing with such calamities, and that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had blessed you with a life where there is khair in it. So use that khair. Using those potentials is basically something that you're going to be asked about. Recognizing the potentials is also a start. What are you good at? It's not necessarily to do riyah, to say, well, I'm really good at maybe teaching. I'm really good at making money. I'm really good at maybe nasheed or whatever it is, or maybe good at making bakery. I'm really good at baking and all of that. I'm horrible at baking, but all right. If you've got basically a potential and you know how to do one particular thing, remember the woman that was described as a black woman in the hadith, she was cleaning the masjid, and the Prophet ﷺ had basically not known that she had died, and she was buried. So the Sahaba, they basically took her, I guess, basically when someone shrouded her and basically gave her the necessary preparation for burial, and then she was buried. But then the Prophet ﷺ had missed her and said, where was she? Where's the woman that was cleaning the masjid? And they said, well, she basically died and you were sleeping, so we didn't want to basically come and disturb your sleep. So we decided to do all the preparation ourselves. The Prophet ﷺ actually goes to her grave. And remember, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, Inna salataka sakanun lahum. Salat is basically salat. The Prophet ﷺ basically prays on her grave, to mean prays for her on her grave in order for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to shed his mercy, etc. And he was sad that he didn't get the chance to be there while she was getting prepared and really pray Salat al-Janazah. And I want you to see right here, this woman, all she was doing was something really rather simple. It was just cleaning the masjid. And we would usually see it as, she was cleaning the masjid. We would really see it as, this is a maid's job, but you could see that this job, this potential that she had used for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, let the Prophet ﷺ, really want to be there for her burial, want to be there for basically shafa'ah, for intercession. And this is important to keep in mind. لا تحقرن من المعروف شيئا. What does that mean? Whenever there's a gratitude, whenever something does good, anything good, don't belittle that. Don't belittle that. You might actually think and see that, a person, this is a scholar, this is a shaykh, giving a dars, etc. They take all the spotlight, when in reality, the person to probably be at the spotlight Yawm al-Qiyamah is probably the woman that's right there and in the kitchen, just washing the dishes and trying to always maintain the masjid. This is real. This is real. And it could be the person that is probably doing all the custodial work. The janitor is probably the only person, maybe out of all the people that were attending that masjid, is probably the only person that's going to be basically considered in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's mercy. He was just the person that was cleaning the masjid, that was seen by everybody that he's doing nothing, or he's doing the dirty job. When Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, just for that effort, because of his ikhlas, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala let him enter Jannah. and basically be the person at the top levels of Jannah, maybe even be min as-siddiqeen, maybe even be min ash-shuhada, maybe even be min as-salihin. Yet a person that was seen in the forefront, maybe the sheikh, the imam, who's, I guess everybody is basically going through to their office, etc., not necessarily get there. Why? Because this hadith tells us right there. Remember the hadith that we were just doing just a minute ago, and where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us, the Prophet ﷺ tells us, in where, yes, they were known that they were putting this effort, they were known to being the scholars, they were known to basically being the hafadah, they were known, all of that. But then what happens is that they basically failed to make it to Jannah. Why? Because they worked towards basically getting the gratitude, basically getting the popularity from the people. And so they got it. In other words, they were known for that. They were known that he's a scholar, he's or she's a sheikha or sheikh, etc. They were known for that. Everybody, they thought that this was the person that was going to make it, because yeah, that person is a sheikh. That person is a scholar. That person is a doctor. That person is basically the one that donated $100,000 or $1 million or $500,000, whatever it is. And when a person that might have actually donated just $2, they just donated $2, probably made it to Jannah, versus a person that probably donated 100,000 didn't make it to Jannah, because the first made the intention for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and the later, the person that made even though $100,000, even though it was seen as a bigger contribution, but it didn't actually make it to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Why? Because this person might have been seeking that, they were basically wanting to do it in order to get acceptance, to get popularity, to get, I guess, somehow recognition for the contribution, or to probably even gain power, because we know that people that would donate the most would basically have later on the most say within, I guess, that masjid, the board, or even probably within the society, because yeah, they're the people that contribute in money, therefore they're the ones that will be granted the highest power to speak, and of course the listening ear. Let's see, the sister is saying, are we able to wear something that looks unisex? I shop to kids wear both gender because I'm small. Could you please explain one or two names that are okay? So are we able, okay, even though that's off topic, but really fast, since I got the question right now. Yes, we're able to wear something that is unisex, something that basically is not male or female. So yes, if something is maybe, I don't know, Skechers shoes, that's what I could think of as unisex. All right, sometimes you could actually have, some clothing that is not necessarily both, not necessarily one particular sex yet. So yes, unless you want to be careful, because right now, they're actually making a lot of unisex clothes in order to take away this basically whole idea of distinguishing between male and female. So just make sure you don't buy their product that contains more than just a product and an ideology that they're trying to sell. So I would say be careful with that one, and be wise and smart in your shopping, and make sure you're not buying an ideology and not a product. So be careful with that one. Can I explain more, explain one or more, okay, names and attributes of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? We'll do that at the end of the class, inshallah, because, or maybe, do we actually, let's look at this one right here. We might actually find, yeah, we'll probably inshallah do that. الذين آمنوا, let's look at that one. الذين آمنوا, we're going to go back to the ayat, and here we go. So we're, all right, here we go. Okay. What's going on here? Okay, my laptop was playing games on me, or maybe I'm just not getting the hang of it now. but that's actually, okay. All right, so here we go. So when you look at this ayah right here, and let me see this one. Can I actually? Yeah, there we go. Okay, here we go. All right. What can you see? Oh, you're actually seeing the wrong screen. Okay, here we go. Now this is better. Okay, so let's continue. الذين آمنوا يقاتلون في سبيل الله والذين كفروا يقاتلون في سبيل الطاغوت. الذين كفروا يقاتلون في سبيل الطاغوت. And of course we said الطاغوت comes from the root طغى. So this is describing الذين كفروا. And of course الذين كفروا, those that would be basically in disbelief. So الكفر, the root كفر would really be meaning to deny. Okay, so this is to deny, but this is not to deny only the bounties of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, but this is also to deny that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had sent the revelation and to the prophets and the messengers. So alladhina kafaru, those that would be in denial of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, those that did not embrace basically Islam, are basically called alladhina kafaru. Are we also described as كفرنا بكم وبدا بيننا وبينكم العداوة والبغضاء, so or العداوة والبغضاء. Okay, so Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says كفرنا بكم, that we are also deniers or in denial, and of course deniers of what they had regarded. So yes, we would deny that atheism is true. So therefore, that's why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tell them that we had كفرنا بكم, we had committed kufr in what you are believing in. All right, so we're denying what they would believe in. We are denying what they would believe in. So so those that are kuffar, basically those that are kuffar, yuqatiluna, they would be fighting fi sabil al-taghut. فقاتلوا أولياء الشيطان. So they would be fighting في سبيل الطاغوت, for the cause of a taghut. So what is a taghut? A taghut basically comes from the root طغى. The root طغى would mean to basically go beyond the limit. Okay, so a taghut would be anything that goes beyond the limit, whether in deen. So if a person basically had some kind of a pagan or an idol that they had worshipped, or if anybody had taken any deity or any god or anything that they regarded as in power, in three different ways. Let's write it down right here. So when we're looking at taghut, maybe I could share one thing. Okay, so here we go. When we look at Tawheed, it's important to look at Tawheed in where, yes, you're regarding Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala as the deity, number two, meaning the God, and number two, you're regarding Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala as your place of worship, and number three, you're regarding the names and attributes that basically belong to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So let's look at this. So it-taghut would be anything that you would worship other than Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So if it's a deity, whether it's called Buddha or whether it's called your money, okay, if that's what to you is important. I know you're like, money, who would say that? The other day, okay, this is off topic a little bit. So we're living in Malaysia, okay, and every once in a while, so we have of course, the Malaysians are pretty much the majority here, of course. And we also have a large minority of Chinese. Of course, generally Chinese, they would have their religion, I don't know, Buddhism, whatever it is. And you would also have the Hindus, a large group of Hindus. And every once in a while, if it's a Hindu religion, they're basically having all these Hindu, I don't know, these Hindu idols all over the place. And if it's basically a Chinese, I guess, New Year, there's this always, you will be hearing this kind of Chinese music and so forth. So I basically asked a Chinese person what that Chinese music was saying. And this is literally what he told me. He said, we only have one God. I looked at him and was like, wait a minute, you actually worship God? And he said, our God is money. I, this is what he told me. So I'm just quoting what he had said.
Oh
He said,
my God.
Wallahi lazim, that's what he told me. He told me, our God
So
is money.
they can burn their God
Well, I mean,
because I
well,
mean it's
I'm sure
paper.
he meant, no, I'm sure he meant it metaphorically. So he was telling me that
Okay.
you see this fat guy, the
Oh
Chinese
yeah,
celebrity,
the
and he's
Buddha.
got all this money and all of that stuff. So basically, he's like, the whole songs really evolve around one thing, which is asking and wishing for more and more and more money for next year and even for the following years. And your life would always have money, and it's always about wishing you for always doubled money and everything but money, money, money. And yeah, I'm sure he meant it as a metaphorical thing, not necessarily a literal thing. Okay, but that was a really astonishing to actually hear it from a person that basically literally, he told it to me straightforward. He's like, we only have one God, and that is money. I'm like, okay, all right. Okay, so Taghut would basically be number one if it's worshiping a different deity, whether that deity, like I said, was some pagan idol, Buddha, or whatever it is, and or number two is basically worshiping something else. And of course, worship is a lot more comprehensive than just in ritual. So worship could also mean, I want you to look at this one, because worship also means in power as well. In other words, what you regard not only in ritual, but also in principle. So ritual is right there included, and so is principle. What do we mean by principle? When we talk about principle, in other words, what do you regard as the definition of right and wrong, justice? What do you regard as the definition of what you are practicing? So basically, the rules that would regulate your life, that's part of worship. So that's why when you look at the definition of Islam, it's basically al-inqiyad wal-khudu' Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It's basically to submit to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, not only in ritual, but also in practice, in the way that you would basically adopt the definition of justice, what you practice in your day-to-day life. This is worship. Now, the final one, which basically is the names and attributes. So some of the names, for example, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is alimul ghaib, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the one that knows the unseen, whether the unseen to mean the future or to mean the past, and where the Lord Almighty is beyond time. So therefore, time does not encompass Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So therefore, He is alim al-ghaib. If you were to believe that by reading, I don't know, the horoscopes, or by, I don't know, going to some kind of a fortune teller, that they have some information about your future and whether this is a good choice, and I don't know, eating a fortune cookie, and this fortune cookie on the inside has this slip of paper, hey, today you're going to meet somebody that's basically going to harm you somehow, and all of that. That's basically believing in a power, whether it's a fortune cookie or whether it's some kind of a person that's fortune teller, or whatever it is, that person has the power of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in knowing the future. That's shirk. So all of these, anything that would be the opposite of this would be considered shirk. So if you worshipped a deity other than Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that's shirk. You basically considered principle, I don't know, you regarded that by law, it says I can't, for example, practice polygamy, therefore I don't want to practice, well, of course, I'm talking about men here, okay, but I don't know why I can only think of this example right now, but all right. So if you were to regard that, oh, I'm going to take the principles of basically this country, Kafir country, or basically that they would be the ones to define justice for me, then in that situation, that's shirk. Same thing if you were to do a ritual and where, yes, everybody is, I don't know, throwing pennies in this pool to get good luck. It's a form of ritual. And yeah, or going trick-or-treating in because a celebration of Halloween, that would actually be considered shirk. All right. Or probably doing other different ritual practices that would be considered shirk. Names and attributes. If you believe that anyone else had or shares the power of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in providing rizq or providing provisions, then that's shirk. Or believing that anyone else gives life, or anyone else controls the power of death, the power of life, the power of the future, changing your future. Any of the names or attributes of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that would actually be considered shirk. So when you look at Asma Allah al-Husna, basically al-Malik, al-Quddus, al-Salam, al-Mu'min, al-Muhaymin, al-Aziz, al-Jabbar, al-Mutakabbir, all those different names and attributes are basically to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. He is the one that brings peace. He is the one that brings power. He is the one that is in control. He's the one that brings life. He's the one that brings death. He is the first. He is the last. He is the subtle, the most subtle, etc. All of those, they're basically to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. To believe that there is any other power shares the power of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that is considered shirk. Okay, so yeah, just to explain that one. So if we say, why did we even bring this up? Because a taghut would be anything that you would regard having one shared at least deity powers or deity status, or whether it's the principle, or in other words, taghut, even if somebody is ruling by other than the rules of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that would be a taghut. Or if a person is basically putting in any ritual other than Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that particular thing becomes a taghut. And the list goes on and on. Okay, so even you look at fi sabil al-taghut, and you would see that there would be a particular, there's no way that anybody can be practicing in life and say, well, I'm here really neutral and religion free, and I'm here basically neutral in where the choices that I make, there's no way. You have to adhere to something. There's no way. It's either that you're adhering to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, or you're adhering to some kind of a taghut. And even if you regarded yourself as, oh, I'm just neutral, I'm basically just trying to be not adhering to any particular religion, because I would believe that all of them are basically at peace, and we should just be neutral and not adhere to a particular faith, and just basically believe in humanity and believe in this universalism. All right, so this in itself is also taghut, because even this idea is not neutral, but it's actually adopting a particular perspective. It's adopting a particular ideology. It's basically, what do you mean by adopting? No, I'm not adopting. I'm basically denying that there is any particular faith that has, or that basically evolves around truth. Well, that in itself, by denying an idea, that in itself is basically adopting an idea. So this basically is part of it. So you denied that, for example, Islam is the only truth. That basically means you had adopted the idea that Islam is not the only religion of truth, and that other religions contain it as well. So you adopted an idea, and therefore, without realizing, you had denied that there is one particular path to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and that you had adopted also the paths of shaitan. Okay, there is, let me see the chat. Human is different. Exactly, human is different. All right. فَقَاتِلُوا أَوْلِيَاءَ الشَّيْطَانِ. So here, semicolon right there. Maybe we can draw that, right? Now let's put it out here. And فَقَاتِلُوا, semicolon. Let's see, semicolon. فَقَاتِلُوا. In other words, after you had basically realized that it's either a path for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, or a path that goes for a taghut, anything that goes beyond, of course, the limit, then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is telling you, فَقَاتِلُوا أَوْلِيَاءَ الشَّيْطَانِ. Then fight أَوْلِيَاءَ الشَّيْطَانِ. And of course here, fighting, it doesn't mean to go and be aggressive necessarily, but this is basically to put the effort to go against all the different things that shaitan is trying to delude people in. In other words, putting the effort. And this is important because you have to have some activism to bring about fi sabilillah, to bring about the change within the society, within your home, that it's directing everyone towards Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. This is important to say. Why? Because we would usually think that by basically being just a random Muslim, that only certain people are the ones that are supposed to be doing Amr bil Ma'ruf and Nahy Munkar / dawah, which is actually not accurate, because Al-Amr bil Ma'ruf and Nahy Munkar is not only for designated people, but this is supposed to be, remember this verb right here, yuqatilun. Yuqatilun, so yes, yuqatilun, whether that meant literally in combat or whether that meant to actually put an effort towards a cause. So this is part of al-amr ma'ruf wa nahy munkar, and this is فَقَاتِلُوا أَوْلِيَاءَ الشَّيْطَانِ إِنَّ كَيْدَ الشَّيْطَانِ كَانَ ضَعِيفًا, in where you put in we're not only here speaking about combat, but also speaking about putting the effort within the society. Don't be somebody that is basically a passive person, a person that's basically not doing anything because everybody else should be doing the job. No, you should have some form of activity in the society, in your home. You have to be involved. You cannot be idle and think that I'm doing my job, I'm just praying and I'm fasting, I don't have anything to say, I'll just be a person because I'm an introvert. That's not a valid reason, because you have to put in that effort. If basically you don't want to be directly involved with people, you have to put in, maybe go through I don't know, media, social media, maybe clean the masjid, be an introvert and clean the masjid, be an introvert and I guess bake cookies or whatever it is and give it to the masjid, maybe write down articles, whatever it is. You cannot be idle. You have to have an activity and an involvement, a contribution to bring about that the religion of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala would basically be something that you work and put the effort towards. There's no such thing as I'm not doing anything because I'm not involved. I don't have the ilm. Even if you don't have the ilm, you have to have your contribution. This is important. That's why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, فَقَاتِلُوا أَوْلِيَاءَ الشَّيْطَانِ. You have to put in, yes, you're fighting those that are awliya, the leaders, basically those that would get support by shaitan. They're working towards that cause. Well, you have to work towards the cause of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And keep in mind, إِنَّ كَيْدَ الشَّيْطَانِ كَانَ ضَعِيفًا. Even if you might think, well, they're actually very organized, their agendas, they're very well paid, etc. Don't let that scare you. Don't let that scare you. And even if you didn't have the strong resources like other agencies, other organizations, other groups might have, don't let that scare you. Keep it working. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is telling you, Kayda shaitan, all the plots of shaitan are da'ifa. Da'ifa to mean that it is weak. It might seem formidable to you. It might seem very well organized. It might seem like it is something that is indefeatable, but Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is telling you that kayd shaitan, the plots that shaitan does are basically da'ifa, are basically weak. They are weak, and therefore Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is telling you, and to read it the other way, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's plots, you hold on to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And there's one little piece is that oftentimes this happens a lot with teenagers, in where when the society basically is practicing a particular trend, the trend gives them, in order to basically belong to a trend, it gives them a sense of power. It gives them a sense of, I'm belonging to something. I'm basically part of a group, a bigger group. And of course, this type of feeling gives them some sort of feeling of security, gives them a feeling of power, gives them a feeling of belonging. And many times, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, of course, in many ayat, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala was warning us of such feelings, of such delusions where we could be self-manipulating ourselves and thinking that by joining a trend that I'm basically getting stronger, more powerful, more secure, etc. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala would warn us of that and tell us, well, right there, you can think that it's giving you more security, it's giving you more power, but the truth of the matter is that this is really nothing but a mirage. Nothing but a mirage, nothing but fake feelings, a fantasy that you're living in. The truth of the matter is that such things do not give power, but really are fake feelings and delusion that one is living in. And the truth of the matter is that the power is actually coming within. What does that mean? The truth of the matter, the power is coming from within. That means your commitment, your faith in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that's what gives the believer the power. Because they recognize that the power is not coming from the people or from their economy or from their arms, but it's actually coming from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That's who has the power to change all the outcomes. That's the one that has all the power. That's why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, part of the names of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is that He gives victory. So just when you feel defeated, remember, victory comes from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, not from the means. That's why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala was telling us in numerous ayat, كم من فئة قليلة غلبت فئة كثيرة بإذن الله. How many? In other words, this is not as here giving you a question, but this is basically telling you, this is to inform you. There's so many different groups that were smaller groups that defeated the larger groups. Why? Because victory comes from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Rizq comes from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It's the investment. But certainly, such an investment, it doesn't mean that, oh, well, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala brings it, I can just contribute and not necessarily care about organization. No, you have to be organized. It's not enough. It's not enough to just do random contribution. You have to put in the necessary means to be organized, the necessary means to basically administer how you do your dawah or how you do your power or how you do your basically administration and how you basically benefit, whether it's administration or whether it's leadership or whether it's marketing, whatever it is, you have to work towards being organized in how it's done. All right. ألم تر إلى الذين قيل لهم كفوا أيديكم وأقيموا الصلاة وآتوا الزكاة فلما كتب عليهم القتال إذا فريق منهم يخشون الناس كخشية الله أو أشد خشية. I want you to look at this ayah. So this was actually in the early times of Islam. Let's look at this ayah. Alam tara. Again, it's taking you to recognizing, again, in the same way, in where, let's see. Abdul Rahman, let's look at this one, the highlighted words right there. Ibn Abbas. Okay, روى عمرو بن دينار عن عكرمة عن ابن عباس. Okay, so عمرو بن دينار. Okay, what happened? عن ابن Abbas that Abdul Rahman ibn Auf, who's one of the 10 people promised Jannah, and certain companions to the Prophet ﷺ, they came to the Prophet ﷺ in Mecca. And they said, O Prophet of Allah, we were in such honor when we were not Muslim and we were basically mushrikeen. And then when we had embraced Islam, we basically became humiliated. So the Prophet ﷺ said, Inni umirtu bil-afu, fala tuqatilu al-qawm. Said, I was ordered to dismiss them. You're not allowed to fight them. Remember, this is Abdul Rahman ibn Auf, one of the millionaires in Mecca. All right. Abdurrahman ibn Auf, he was feeling that, wait a minute, at one point, my millions, my power was basically giving me all the authority, was giving me all the power, was giving me all the respect. But once I had embraced Islam, here I am. I'm basically humiliated. I'm basically disrespected. And all of that really happened when I had become Muslim. But then the Prophet ﷺ insisted, we were just ordered to basically, لا تقاتل القوم, don't fight them. Then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, فَلَمَّا حَوَلَهُ اللَّهُ تَعَالَى إِلَى الْمَدِينَةِ, when he had migrated to Medina, when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala basically transitioned the Prophet ﷺ to Medina, أَمَرَهُ بِالْقِتَالِ فَكَفُّوا. When, of course, they were ordered to fight. This is not Abdurrahman ibn Auf, but this is talking about a large, or at least a number of those that went to Mecca. They basically did not want to fight, even though they were asking to fight at one point. But this is, of course, not Abdurrahman ibn Auf, because Abdurrahman ibn Auf was actually one of the 10 people promised Jannah. So this is not describing the Sahaba. Let's see this one. And let me first, Alam Tara, do you see those that were when they are told to not fight? Kufu aydiyakum. To basically, this kufu aydiyakum literally means stop your hands, but this is not talking about stopping hands. This is basically a compound word, and this compound word basically here, kufu aydiyakum, is a metaphor to mean do not engage in combat. Okay, وَأَقِيمُوا الصَّلَاةَ, and instead you're going to, number one, you're not going to engage in combat, and أَقِيمُوا الصَّلَاةَ, you're going to perform prayer, and you're going to give zakah. And in other words, how's that related to it? So this is in order to tell them that in a way, in what is supposed to be, as let's call it, a tool to help you overcome the feeling of anger and the feeling of retaliation, and yet you were asked to basically not be in combat. They were asked to use salah and zakah as a mean of therapy. I want to look at this one. As a mean of therapy. In other words, to help you grow in your connection with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala when you cannot engage in combat in order to defend yourself. Well, you have to use a different kind of a contribution. You have to use salah as the method to help you endure the different hardships that you're facing, to help you face and basically embrace sabr, patience. Atu az-zakah, give zakah, basically donating is zakah, which is 2.5%. And of course, there are certain items. It's not just cash that you make zakah on, but you would make zakah on certain animals. If we're talking about used such as cattle, such as sheep, such as camels, so not cattle to mean cows, but camels to mean, the camels, CAMELS. Okay, and also produce, certain produce. You would basically also differences of opinions between scholars on whether it's every produce, في كل ما أخرجت الأرض زكاة, is basically the Hanafi opinion, or whether it's in certain produce such as barley, or even dates, or certain, which kind of produce, which kind of herbs do we make zakah on, and the amount basically for those in order to reach what is called a nisab. A nisab basically means the limit. So right now, the nisab in cash is equivalent to $4,122 US dollars. In gold, it's equivalent to 85 grams of gold. Okay, 85 grams of gold, and basically we would take it from there. Okay, let's continue. فَلَمَّا كُتِبَ عَلَيْهِمُ الْقِتَالِ, when they were ordered to basically, and I want you to look at this one. Kutiba, they were, the word kutiba, in other words, they were obligated, it was prescribed on them. So kutiba comes from the root kataba, which means to kataba, to write. But this is not to actually write, meaning on a piece of paper, but this is to mean to obligate. So when they were obligated to fight, some of them, they went into fear. What fear did they go into? They feared people, and they feared the people as much as they feared Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. أو أشد خشية, or even worse. But wait a minute. Fear, isn't that a feeling that we cannot control? Didn't Prophet Musa alayhi salam also live in fear at many times? Pay attention to this one. Fear is at different levels. There is basically the natural feeling of fear, the instinct fear, in where you're afraid of losing your son, or losing your health, or losing your wealth, or maybe your house burning down, whatever. Okay, you're afraid. This is an instinct. This is a natural fear that you will have. Okay, the other type of fear is basically not, of course, you can fear something that where you have the data that probably directs you towards that. And you could also have fear. So we're talking about fear of future, and we could also fear something in akhirah, or we could also fear things that relate to our life, not necessarily an instinct. So you're afraid that maybe you might not get married, or you're afraid you might lose your job, or you're talking about fears in the future. Okay, so such a fear, or even you might actually have certain fears that are not necessarily realistic in that situation. Basically paranoia, kind of like a phobia. Okay, you're afraid of being, I don't know, I'm claustrophobic, but you're afraid of maybe tight areas, or afraid of maybe, I don't know, a mosquito, and you're just totally afraid of mosquitoes, and you just, okay, and let's call it a phobia that is just, I guess, classified as really some kind of a mental thing, where a person can actually exaggerate that. Now, certain fears are basically part of your nature. Okay, you're not held accountable for it. So fears like, I'm afraid that my house might burn down. I'm afraid that I might lose my money. I'm afraid that I might be diagnosed with cancer. There are certain fears that are basically part of your nature. All right, that doesn't mean that you basically lack iman. It's not. But what helps you overcome such fears as a therapy is iman. How is faith going to help me overcome such fears? Iman helps you overcome such fears by you putting in the focus. In other words, you are basically transitioning your focus from looking at the outcomes, probably in fear of death, or probably in fear of loss of dunya, to focusing that anyways Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will compensate me. Anyways, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has me in good hands. Anyways, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the one that provides. Anyways, لا يصيبنا إلا ما كتب الله لنا. Verily, what will happen to us is only something that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had destined. And no matter what happens, I know Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will. لا يغلب عسرا جسرا. No two sad or negative things will overcome, or not, yusrain, sorry, no evil thing overcomes two eases. So in other words, with every bad thing that happens, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will compensate you and bring you something good. So that way, once you transition and you re-examine your fears, what makes us afraid? We're afraid of perhaps dying. We're afraid of losing something. We're afraid that we might be vulnerable. We're afraid, etc. But when you redirect your focus from you being in charge of yourself, of your health, of your wealth, of your outcome, of your success, to recognizing that the one that is actually in charge of all of that is really Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. He's the one that gave you the rizq. He's the one that gave you all the provisions. He's the one that gave you the life. He's the one that gave you the children. He's the one that gives you health. He's the one that gives you this. So therefore, he's the one that is going to be the one as a Rabb, as the one to cherish it. He's the one that's going to be in complete care of it. And that's why we use the word التوكل. التوكل would basically mean that you would seek refuge, you depend on Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, because you are redirecting your focus from you being in charge of your situation to considering that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is in charge, and you're just putting in an investment and you're just putting in your effort to save it and protect it. But the truth of the matter is really Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That's why if you look at the story of Prophet Musa, I think the story of Prophet Musa is probably the most story where fear is always in the story. In where Prophet Musa alayhi salam, of course, even when the cane was thrown, he ran away. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala was training him. Inni la yakhafu ladayya al-mursalun. No, you can't be afraid. Prophet Musa, what was he doing? He was walking in Medina. The mother was afraid. So she puts her son in this bassinet and basically all of that. Fear was always present. But it wasn't until Prophet Musa alayhi salam, basically trained by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. All right. وَاصْطَنَعْتُكَ لِنَفْسِي. That's what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells Prophet Musa. اصْطَنَعْتُكَ. I had made you. I had basically disciplined you. لِنَفْسِي. For a mission that I want you to take to carry on. وَاصْطَنَعْتُكَ لِنَفْسِي. That's what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells him. When the people of the Pharaoh, the soldiers, basically were heading after them, even though they called them shardimatun qalilun, even though they called them nothing but a small gang. But the Bani Israel, along with Prophet Musa alayhi salam, they were running away, of course, in the middle of the night in order to run away from the Pharaoh. But then the Pharaoh recognizes that they had run away, so he basically follows them along with his soldiers. And then the people of Bani Israel, they cried out and said, Inna la mudrakun. That's it. We're caught. We're doomed. In other words, that's the end of us. Prophet Musa alayhi salam, who was, again, not when he was born, but even before he was born, his mother, his father, everybody was living in fear, and fear definitely was probably transitioning and transmitting from the mother to the family to his heart as well, and where fear was always there. But then still, when the faith of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala grows in your heart, you learn and you grow and you learn how to transition from you being in charge and being afraid to recognizing that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the one in charge. That's when Prophet Musa alayhi salam, when the Bani Israel, they said, Inna la mudrakun. That's it. We're doomed. They're going to catch us. He said, Kalla inna ma'i rabbi sayahdin. Verily, my Lord. What did he use? He used the word Rabbi. Kalla inna ma'i rabbi sayahdin. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will guide us. Verily not. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is with me. He will guide us. Inna ma'iya rabbi sayahdin. And this is basically to teach us, when you're living in phobia, in fear, it's an issue of redirecting your focus from you thinking you're in charge to recognizing that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is in charge. It's redirecting your focus. It's basically the stronger your faith grows in the names and attributes of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the more you will recognize that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is what you need to have khashya in, fear in, embracement. Embrace Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala as being the main power. وَقَالُوا رَبَّنَا لِمَ كَتَبْتَ عَلَيْنَا الْقِتَالِ. Those were the people that were afraid. What happens? The people that are afraid will start to use different words of ventilation, will start to use different ways to run away from the prescribed act. And they would say, Ya Allah, why did you prescribe killing or combat onto us? If only you had delayed it to a later timing. So they're teaching, look at that. So what were they ventilating? What were they saying? Ya Allah, hey, we're really afraid. If only you delayed that. We're not ready. We're not prepared for all of this. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is teaching us how to redirect our focus from fear to having that faith and security in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. قل متاع الدنيا قليل والآخرة خير لمن اتقى. Tell them, teach them, let them embrace, let them redirect their focus that this dunya, the amount of entertainment in it, whether entertainment mata' to mean security or mata' to mean wealth or health or life, this is just very minimal. It's just a short period. In other words, your fears are basically concerned in that moment to a timing that is a very short timing. Don't make it perpetual. And وَالْآخِرَةُ خَيْرٌ لِمَنِ اتَّقَى. The real perpetual feeling, the perpetual care, the perpetual concern should be about the akhirah, because that's of a long term, and that's what will be perpetual, and that's what will be forever. So let your fear be directed at that. And وَالْآخِرَةُ خَيْرٌ لِمَنِ اتَّقَى. And the true security is going to be in the hereafter if لِمَنِ اتَّقَى. Meaning what? I'm already afraid, and you're telling me to have taqwa, another type of fear? Why are you replacing one fear with another fear? No, it's telling you a taqwa is not fear necessarily. Liman ittaqa, for those that would practice and embrace taqwa, taqwa is complete love in where you're afraid that such, basically whatever you're in love of, you're afraid to lose it. Like what? Taqwa Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, you're in deep love to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, you're in deep commitment to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, you're afraid that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will not be content over you despite all that you're trying to contribute. Maybe you're not doing enough. That's taqwa. So what would you do? You would basically not stay at the borders and say, well, what's haram is looking at haram websites. But you actually take a step back and you basically don't even head towards those websites that would have these ads. You basically would probably go to your, I guess, those in your, I guess, in your settings, and make sure that you would never get such ads and never get such things. And you basically take whatever is necessary. So in that situation, you're practicing taqwa. You know that there is some fitna to you in a particular restaurant. You would basically practice taqwa and you would say, I want to stay away from all of this. You know that there is a friend that's always, whenever you would engage with her, she's so fun. She's so fun to be around. And and usually fun people. Of course, I've had one time somebody say, yeah, I just find a lot of entertainment with people that are not religious. And I say, of course, absolutely. You find a lot of entertainment in them. Of course. What's so surprising about that? Why? Because they're living for dunya. They're living for dunya. They're just with no concern. What what is more funner? No concern and just living for the sake of, hey, finding pleasure? Or is it, that's why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala was basically telling us for about those that were usually destructed are people that are seeking rafahiyya, people that were seeking atrafnahum is always the word that is used, that they were basically living in some kind of taraf, some kind of a level where they're just concerned about bringing in more and more entertainment. Taraf. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala was helping us to learn how to redirect our fears by seeing that whatever security that you're seeing in this dunya or pleasures you're seeing in this in dunya, and that it is actually very, one, that it is short in its period, two, that it is basically small and minimal, and certainly it's temporary in where compared to the akhirah. وَلَا تُظْلَمُونَ فَتِيلًا, and you will not be abused even with fatila. What is al-fatil? Al-fatil is really one side of the date, but this has nothing to do with dates. This is a metaphor right here. So even if it's something that is a small lining within a date or a small line within a date, even though people are usually regarding it that's not really what brings in the nutrients and not of any importance. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is telling you, well, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is not going to disregard even the smallest contribution that you would contribute for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That's basically the metaphor and what it's trying to get to. So il-fatil is here not necessarily that la tudlamuna fatila to mean having anything to do with dates. And أينما تكونوا يدرككم الموت, even when your fears are basically afraid of dying, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is telling you, well, wherever you would be, أينما تكونوا, wherever you may be, death is going to come to you. Even if you were in buruj al-mushayyada, whether al-buruj al-mushayyada to mean in, I don't know, in places in space, or whether to mean in well-maintained palaces or well-maintained towers. At the end of the day, there's no running away from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala when He decrees death onto you. وَإِن تُصِبْهُمْ حَسَنَةٌ يَقُولُوا هَذِهِ مِنْ عِنْدِ اللَّهِ. Usually people would consider, of course, this is right there, إن تصبهم حسنة, whenever a good thing that would happen to them, they would basically هذه من عند الله. This is from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. وإن تصبهم سيئة يقولوا هذه من عندك. So basically, so for the kuffar, they would regard whatever good happens to them, they would regard it as, well, it's because we put the effort to make it happen. And whatever happens, anything evil, they don't want to attribute something evil that they were the ones to basically make it happen, that they were the ones that were really the cause for it. So they will basically say, why did Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, why did God make this happen? Why couldn't He stop it? If there was a God, He would have actually made all of this not happen and would have stopped all the evil and brought about an end to evil. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala basically, قُلْ كُلٌّ مِّنْ عِنْدِ اللَّهِ, all of it was decreed by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. What does that mean? Evil and good is from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? No. So there is some, or every good that happens to you is basically a decree by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And everything good, every rizq is basically from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Everything, when you say كُلٌّ مِّنْ عِنْدِ اللَّهِ, so here we go, قُلْ كُلٌّ مِّنْ عِنْدِ اللَّهِ, all of it is from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, is basically to say it was decreed by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It was decreed. So even the evil things are decreed by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It was decreed to mean that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had foreknowledge that this was going to happen, and He had created within nature certain things that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had destined, certain things to happen in a certain way. And of course, what you do might also anticipate and accelerate certain things to happen to you. Basically, if a person were to put in an evil act, this would accelerate probably a punishment from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. You never know. So your actions are going to decree, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had already decreed, because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is beyond time. So he knew what choices you were going to make. So your qada wa qadar, basically Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had the foreknowledge, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had decreed in where whatever power, whatever energy happens in the society around you, it doesn't happen on its own. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gives the power the power. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gives the energy. There's no such thing as an energy moving on its own and making things happen. So matter in motion is not matter in motion, but it's basically Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala giving it the power and the motion to happen. And therefore, we cannot consider that the sun basically is an energy, a ball of energy, in where it gives energy, because the energy itself was given by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And that's why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala would tell us in Surah Al-Hadid, هو الأول والآخر والظاهر والباطن. He's the first and he's the last. الظاهر والباطن. He's also the force that is apparent, and he's also the force that is subtle, that you cannot see. So he's the real force behind all of the things that are around you. So bring life, bring death, bring provisions, كل من عند الله. So can we say Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is basically giving us and making things evil? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala does. We do not attribute evil to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala out of honoring Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And that's why we would say, وَالشَّرُّ لَيْسَ إليك. We would not attribute evil to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. فَمَا لِهَؤُلَاءِ الْقَوْمِ لَا يَكَادُونَ يَفْقَهُونَ حَدِيثًا. What happens with these people is that they may not understand what is being said to them. In other words, to really understand what is beyond materialistic things that basically function around them, that is maturity. To understand what is beyond, that is maturity. To understand what's controlling all the forces that surround you, what's controlling the force of security, the force of safety, the force of basically fear, all of that. You basically connect it and redirect your focus from you being in charge to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala being in charge, and then you'll be capable of being mature and going beyond the surface vision and understanding of the world around you to being deeper in your insight, and being deeper in your insight and being deeper in how you observe the things around you. And that's where you would basically live to recognizing ما أصابك من حسنة فمن الله. You would recognize that every single good thing that happens to you is basically from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. وما أصابك من سيئة فمن نفسك. And whatever evil that happens to you is really as a result of what you had committed. So does that mean every single time I do something wrong? We went in details with that one. I think maybe 5 lectures ago, and we talked about when we're speaking about something that we might have done, and we said this is in certain situations. So not every single evil thing that happens to you is necessarily because of an evil thing that you had done. And we said that evil or bad things happening to you can be as a result of a test to certain people. And even when we're speaking about good things, that it can also be وَنَبْلُوَكُمْ بِالشَّرِّ وَالْخَيْرِ فِتْنَةً. So shar, evil and good can also be a fitna and can also be a trial. So we usually think that only good or only evil things are basically evil. So in other words, sometimes good things, sometimes you given an opportunity and privileges that they might actually be bad for you. Not always is a privilege necessarily a privilege. Sometimes privileges can work the opposite way of your benefit. So sometimes by taking away certain privileges, maybe Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala taking away your health from you, that got you closer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala putting you in certain circumstances, maybe is a way to help you get closer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, because you would feel more vulnerable and therefore recognize the power of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Recognize, وَأَرْسَلْنَاكَ لِلنَّاسِ رَسُولًا, and we had sent you as a prophet to the people, as a messenger to the people, as one to redirect people's focus, to redirect people's basically commitment, redirect people's principles, redirect and redefine people's principles, and redirect their commitment and their purposes. Basically, as a prophet of Allah, that's what the prophet was actually sent to remind and guide people. وَكَفَى بِاللَّهِ شَهِيدًا, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the one that is all and enough and suffice to be a witness and to be the one to basically witness that the Prophet ﷺ was actually sent to deliver a message. And shahida on what? Shahida that the Prophet ﷺ had delivered the message, shahida that this is the purpose that preceded your existence. I had to finish the page. Alhamdulillah. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala make us from those that would have the commitment and would have basically, you know what, let me just add this ayah. مَن يُطِعِ الرَّسُولَ فَقَدْ أَطَاعَ اللَّهَ, because it's related to directly. Whoever obeys Allah, the Prophet ﷺ, then they would have obeyed Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. وَمَن تَوَلَّ فَمَا أَرْسَلْنَاكَ عَلَيْهِمْ حَفِيظًا, and whoever turns their back, here tawalla means turn their back, and we had not sent you as hafiza. The word hafiz would basically mean a preserver. Okay, but this is, in this context, it's not a preserver. Hafiza, in this context, all right, because remember, when we're living in fear, what we're seeking is preservation. What we're seeking is something to keep us grounded. That's what we're seeking. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is telling you, when you're living those fears, all right, to help you stay feeling grounded, secure, and basically feeling that you're going to be okay, basically, then in that situation, to help you get there, just obey the Prophet ﷺ, and that way you will basically be considered as obeying Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And that's how you would basically ensure your security and your safety. We'll end it right here. This is actually more than one page, so alhamdulillah, may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala make us from those that are guarded, guided, and those that have true tawakkul on Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Allahumma ameen. So any questions? I know we had some people, it's like, okay, this is going far. So we'll end it right here, inshallah. And Rabbi yahfadhkum jami'an. If there are any questions, you can unmute yourselves if you would like. وإياكم, and ربي يحفظكم جميعا. We'll see you, I guess, tomorrow. We really went.
I only have one question,
Go ahead.
because I can't just let you leave like that. No, I'm just Alhamdulillah. Okay, so we can combine two sunnahs if we have the intention to combine them, right?
So this is a general wording, because two sunnahs depends on the sunnah. So there are certain sunnahs that you cannot do what is called tashriq fi niyyah. Tashriq fi niyyah basically means you have two intentions for one particular ibadah. There are two, if one sunnah basically is
Like Taraweeh and the
Right.
sunnah after
No,
Aysha.
you cannot combine those. Those are two different things.
Oh,
Yeah, those are, Taraweeh is one thing, and the Sunnah for Al-Isha is another, it's another ibadah. But you can combine, for example, nafil, or you went into the masjid and you wanted to combine Taraweeh and also Tahiyyat al-Masjid. Okay, you can do
oh,
that.
you could do it with that? Oh,
Yeah. All right.
Okay.
So if, you can you can actually combine two things that are not a particular and a separate ibadah on their own.
Okay. That makes sense.
All right.
Alhamdulillah.
So inshallah, we will see
Jazakallah.
you all tomorrow. وإياكم.